Every business, regardless of its size, must provide its employees with safe working conditions. And considering the range of potential hazards, from asbestos to slippery stairs to excessive noise, that can be difficult for a small business. And why should everyone be so concerned about job safety and health? Because each year, approximately 6,000 employees in this country die from workplace injuries, while another 50,000 die from illnesses caused by exposure to workplace hazards. In addition, 6 million workers suffer non-fatal workplace injuries at an annual cost to U.S. businesses of more than $125 billion. Standards and rules for safe working conditions, tools, equipment, facilities, and processes are set by the Labor Department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. OSHA standards apply to every private employer with one or more employees, except for those in industries covered by other federal job safety legislation. Today, roughly 93 million employees across the country are protected by state and federal OSHA programs. But even with adequate safety measures, accidents do happen. And more often than not, very serious accidents result in very serious traumatic brain injuries. And that's why medical experts like traumatic brain injury specialist
Dr. Huma Haider,
the founder of the National Brain Injury Institute in Houston, Texas, are called upon to render expert medical examinations on these cases.
My name is Dr. Huma Haider. I am a traumatic brain injury specialist. My specialty is to diagnose and treat patients who have suffered mild, moderate, or severe traumatic brain injury. The reason I got into this specialty was a very tragic private experience. My husband was killed in a motorcycle accident about 10 years ago. That was a very difficult time for myself and my family. I found comfort in treating patients who had suffered traumatic brain injury. And as a result, I proceeded with my career and did a specialization in neurocritical care, where I would diagnose and treat patients with traumatic brain injury on a daily basis. Some of the very common causes of traumatic brain injury are: number one, slip and fall accidents. A lot of people think that motor vehicle accidents are the number one cause of traumatic brain injury, but in fact, slip and fall accidents are the number one cause of traumatic brain injury. The second most common cause of traumatic brain injury is running into something or someone, like athletic injuries or sports-related injuries. And the third most common cause of traumatic brain injury is motor vehicle accidents. The most important part of the diagnosis of traumatic brain injury is providing a comprehensive neurological evaluation. What it means is that patients will come to our clinic, we sit down with the patient. It takes about 2 to 3 hours for us to go through in detail all the symptoms that the patient is experiencing. We also go into a lot of detail about the mechanics of injury or mechanism of injury. How did the patient suffer the traumatic brain injury? Then we go through a list of the symptoms that they are experiencing. For example, the most common symptoms that the patients start to suffer after traumatic brain injury are the post-traumatic headaches. They start to experience memory deficits. They cannot remember conversations. They cannot remember names. They start to suffer from depression, anxiety, and the diagnosis involved, or I would say it's very important to go through each and every symptom, and which is important for the diagnosis and treatment of the patient. Once that is done, putting all that information together helps me come up to a diagnosis of a traumatic brain injury and a treatment plan.
In this insider exclusive network TV special, Justice in America, Jose Juan Puente's story, our news team is on location in Austin, Texas, meeting with Todd Kelly, partner at the Carlson Law Firm, who represents Jose Juan Puente and his family, and Dr. Huma Haider, founder of the National Brain Injury Institute, one of America's leading traumatic brain injury experts, to discuss the specific legal challenges and strategies to win this case, as well as how in serious accidents, traumatic brain injuries are identified, diagnosed, and assessed. Todd has earned a reputation as an unyielding trial lawyer who repeatedly represents individuals and families against big companies and the Goliaths of the world, and repeatedly wins. He has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike, As one of the best trial lawyers in Texas, Todd has built a substantial reputation nationwide by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down. And his amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide his clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Austin, Texas. It is my great pleasure to introduce Todd Kelly to the show. Welcome to the show, Todd.
Thank you, Steve. Good to be here.
Tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your firm.
I'm a board-certified trial lawyer. I have been practicing law for about 25 years, a little over. I work at the Carlson Law Firm. I manage the North Austin office of the Carlson Law Firm. We are predominantly a personal injury trial firm. We represent everything from car wrecks to sexual assault, human trafficking cases, and we have a few lawyers that actually do some mass tort cases. So we kind of run the gamut of personal injury. We have 14 offices in and around Texas, with one in Los Angeles, actually.
Todd, tell our audience a little bit about your client, Mr. Puente.
So Jose was a tile setter. He was actually working at a job site laying tile, and as he's bent over, face down, working on his tiles, he's hit on the top of the head by essentially a cinder block that had been knocked out. It was a concrete, they call it a CMU, a concrete masonry unit, had been knocked out of the wall. Actually, a bunch of them had. One of them hit him on the head by a forklift operated by an employee of the company called Strong Electric. He was actually a temporary employee from a company by the name of Quality Labor Management, or QLM, and then on temp loan to Strong Electric. He was not licensed to operate that forklift, and yet he operated the forklift that day, and by his own testimony, he had warned everybody, I don't have a permit to do this, I'm not qualified to do this. They essentially told him, just be careful. And so he, with a raised forklift, knocked bricks out of the wall that fell some 10 or 11 feet before they hit Mr. Puente in the head.
What happened immediately after that?
So immediately after that, Mr. Puente came up. He was bleeding. He asked to go to the hospital, and his supervisor did not call an ambulance, did not initially call an ambulance, and preferred rather to take him to the hospital in person. We have come to believe that the reason for that is that they didn't want to report this as a workplace injury. But ultimately, he did go to the hospital and was diagnosed initially with a concussion and ultimately with a fairly significant traumatic brain injury.
The boom operator, the boom lift operator, he has admitted liability on this, right?
Yes and no. He has admitted that he wasn't supposed to be operating, and he has admitted that he was operating. He's admitted that he's in fact the person that drove the boom lift through the wall. But when you ask him if it was his fault, he doesn't actually come out and agree to that. He blames the Strong Electric supervisor that told him he had to operate.
Okay, he was forced to do it, he said.
Claims that he feared that he would lose his job if he didn't. He said he had seen other employees lose their job for refusing to do what their supervisors had told them to do, and he thought that that would be his fate as well.
Now, there's no doubt that your client, Mr. Puente, was injured and suffered traumatic brain injury. But my question to you is, there are a number of parties that are pointing the finger at each other. Who are those parties, and why are they blaming each other?
So you have, essentially you have the two, the QLM, the Quality Labor Management Company, which actually employed the boom lift operator, Mr. Santos. And then you have Strong Electric Company that was running the job site for whom QLM temp loaned that employee to. The two are pointing the finger at each other. Strong Electric is saying that the QLM employee was not qualified, shouldn't have been on there. He was your employee anyway, and so you're responsible. Meanwhile, QLM is saying, you didn't ask for a qualified employee, you just asked for an employee, we sent you one, you guys are the ones that forced him to operate the boom lift, and so you're responsible. From the perspective of a plaintiff's attorney, the fact that neither is arguing about damages and neither is arguing that the boom lift operator wasn't at fault, we're kind of in a pretty good position in this case to let the jury sort it out. We actually believe both were responsible and both have pretty much equal liability in this case.
Okay, and Mr. Puente has suffered severe injuries. I understand that you discussed or talked with his oldest daughter. What did she say?
His life has changed. He's angry now. He doesn't remember things like he used to remember them, and simply put, he doesn't function like he used to function, and they're very worried about it.
Speaking of the fact that this is a traumatic brain injury, we have with us today one of Texas's and the country's leading experts in this area, Dr. Huma Haider. So we're going to bring her on right now to talk a little bit about traumatic brain injuries. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Huma Haider to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Tell our audience a little bit about your institute that you have in Houston, and I understand you have 6 offices around the country. What is it called and what do you do?
My medical practice is called National Brain Injury Institute. I started that about 3 years ago. We started from Houston, but now we have offices in Dallas, San Antonio, Los Angeles, Orlando, and Phoenix. At National Brain Injury Institute, our goal and our focus is to diagnose and provide the appropriate treatment and rehabilitative care that these patients who suffer from mild, moderate, and severe traumatic brain injury, they need and they deserve that care and treatment.
When you have patients that are referred to you, that come into your office, what are the steps that you take to determine whether someone actually has traumatic brain injury?
When a patient suffers from a traumatic brain injury, they go through, some patients will recover in the first 3 months, but after 3 months, if the patient continues to have physical symptoms, cognitive symptoms, and behavioral symptoms, then the likelihood of these symptoms becoming chronic is very high. And these patients require appropriate diagnosis and treatment to stabilize their symptoms, to treat their symptoms, to make their symptoms prevent them from getting worse moving forward. So when the patients come to National Brain Injury Institute, we are performing comprehensive neurological evaluations for these patients. And then we are coming up with a treatment plan and the diagnostic studies or the rehabilitative care that the patient needs. So the treatment plan consists of treatment of the symptoms that the patient is suffering from. For example, 95% of the patients with traumatic brain injury will suffer from post-traumatic headaches. So the first thing that we do is we start them on pharmacological treatment. What it is we will prescribe them medications to prevent the headaches, to abort these headaches, or to use some medications as needed. Now, if the pharmacological treatment doesn't work, then we go to the next step. The next step involves giving them some injections that are related to the treatment of post-traumatic headaches. Those injections include Botox injections, greater occipital nerve block injections, lesser occipital nerve block injections. If those injections don't work, then we go to the next step. Then we are using some non-invasive neuromodulation devices, which are very helpful in controlling the symptoms of the patient. Now, if those non-invasive neuromodulation devices, they also do not provide adequate relief for the patient's symptoms, then we go to the next step, which is surgical step where we can do occipital nerve decompression or some other minimally invasive procedures to provide relief to the patient. So that is one symptom that we are giving them treatment of. Now, another common symptom that these patients suffer from cognitive deficits. For example, they're going to have deficits of short-term memory. They're going to have deficits of long-term memory. They're going to have attention deficits. So what we are doing is that we are first performing comprehensive evaluation of their deficits. And based on the information that we are getting, then we are coming up with the targeted treatment plan for the patient. For example, if they are showing major deficits in memory, then we're going to provide them rehabilitative care in the memory domain. For example, if they're having major deficits in attention area, then we're going to provide them targeted treatment and give them exercises where it's going to help improve their attention span. Now, if they're having major deficits in executive functioning or their judgment area, then we're going to provide them treatment that will help improve and strengthen those functions of the brain. And now let's go on to the third aspect of traumatic brain injury, which is behavioral symptoms. Many patients will suffer from depression, anxiety, irritability, fatigue, mood swings. So we perform assessments, comprehensive, to diagnose their mood disorders, and then we're going to provide them targeted treatment for those mood disorders as well. And those treatments include pharmacological treatment, such as prescribing them medication, but a big part of it is combining the pharmacological treatment with therapy, such as a psychotherapy, such as a counselor who could meet with these patients, who could, on a weekly basis or a twice weekly basis, and go over the challenges, difficulties, or the symptoms that they are experiencing, and provide them the tools that will help them through their journey after their traumatic brain injury.
These counselors, these therapists, are they at your institute too?
Yes, we do have a full-time licensed professional counselors who provide psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, eye movement desensitization therapy. They also provide cognitive rehabilitation therapies as well. We also have psychologists on staff who also participate in providing the therapies and neurocognitive rehabilitation.
Right. I also want to clarify one thing. Sometimes when you have a traumatic brain injury, the symptoms do not exhibit themselves right away. It could be not just weeks or months, it could be years later, correct?
Yes, many patients, I would say hundreds of patients that I have seen, they have been suffering from the symptoms of traumatic brain injury. As you know, I keep on elaborating that they can have physical symptoms, they can have cognitive symptoms, they can have behavioral symptoms, and these patients have been experiencing those symptoms for months and years, but they were unidentified. They have gone through many different doctors. They go through chiropractors, they go to pain doctors, they go through primary care physicians, they go through orthopedic doctors, but the cluster of the symptoms that these patients experience, nobody is asking them about those symptoms. And if they're not being asked about those symptoms, then patients, they do not volunteer that information because they themselves are not able to connect all the dots together that the symptoms that I'm experiencing are because of the traumatic brain injury. And that leads us back to the fact that traumatic brain injury is undiagnosed, underdiagnosed, and untreated. Many medical providers are not aware of that. Many medical providers are not trained to do that, and many medical providers are not putting forth the time and effort to identify and diagnose traumatic brain injury. As a result, patients go undiagnosed and untreated for years. I have seen patients who come to me 4 or 5 years later, and during the entire 4 or 5 years, they have been struggling, they have been disabled, they have been in pain, but as I said, they were unfortunate to suffer with these symptoms for such a long time.
And Todd, you know this in trying many of these cases, that one of the ways you're able to compare the before and the after, right, is by interviewing some people who are close to them, their wives, sure, their former coworkers.
Coworkers are really key because a lot of times the coworker will say there's just been a dramatic change in this person. Often promotions that were expected don't happen. Sometimes people actually lose their jobs. But it would be axiomatic that a person with a brain injury doesn't know they have a brain injury a lot of the time. It's the very tool that they would use to determine whether or not the brain is injured is the brain, and it's injured, so they can't really get there. But other people observing them is really the key. And when you talk about these changes, and some of them are really dramatic.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being on the show. You had a lot of insight, because I see, as you have mentioned, Todd, I see that, it's almost impossible sometimes for the individual who's been injured to be able to relate to what they used to do and what they're not able to do today, correct?
That is correct. And as Todd mentioned, it is very helpful to get this information or ask this from the family members, which we do on a routine basis, and they would come because the patients who are coming to us, they have brain injury, they are having memory problem, they themselves don't remember the entire extent of their injury, entire extent of their damage. But people who are around them, who are with them on a day-to-day basis, who are observing them, they are able to give us so much information about their change in personality that that they have become a completely different person. They are arguing all the time. They're irritable all the time. They have a short fuse now. And many of the patients with traumatic brain injury, they are prone to becoming a homeless person because they lose their jobs. They're not able to perform well at their work. They're not able to keep up with the routine. They're not able to keep up with the schedule. They are also prone to going to prisons because they suffer from these mood and behavioral disturbances, which can lead them into difficulties with the law. Suicide is another a very common area where traumatic brain injury patients are becoming prone to. They can become suicidal and they can commit suicide. So this is a national epidemic which is unrecognized, and as a result, many of the patients are suffering on a daily basis.
Again, I want to thank you very much for being on the show. You've added a lot of insight.
Thank you very much.
Todd, what is an employer's responsibility in accidents like this?
There's several ways that an employer is responsible. One of them was what we call in the law respondeat superior, which means that an employer is responsible for the actions of its employees that are done in the course and scope of that employment. We certainly have that here, both with respect to Strong Electric and with respect to QLM. But there's more than that. There's also some direct liability when a company directs or knowingly allows certain behaviors. In this case, they certainly at least knowingly allowed Mr. Santos to get on that forklift and operate it, and the evidence has shown that he was operating it pretty much the whole week that he was there. And there's also Mr. Santos testified when he gave his deposition that not only was he allowed to do so, but he was directed to do so. So when you have somebody directing a course of action that you know to be negligent, you can be directly responsible for that as well. In this case, we have that, particularly with Strong and potentially with QLM as well.
Any other comments on this case you want to add?
Yeah, one of the things that happens sometimes in litigation when companies think they're being a little too tricky is that they destroy or fail to maintain records that they're told to maintain. In this case, one of the things that we had heard allegation of is that Mr. Santos had actually previously had a boom lift accident. In fact, one of the witnesses has said that when he got off the boom lift, his first words were, "Oh no, not again." And so we asked for his prior records, and as you can imagine, we hoped that those prior records would show that. The case went on for quite some time before we actually knew Mr. Santos' name. But in internal documents between Strong Electric and QLM, we know that Strong Electric also asked for those same documents to be preserved, and they did ask for them by name. However, shortly after filing the lawsuit, we got a letter from QLM saying they had destroyed the personnel file of Mr. Santos, according to them, in accordance with their own document retention records. One of the things that we have in some jurisdictions is we have what's called a spoliation of evidence. Means if you destroy evidence, the presumption is that that evidence is bad for you and there's a reason that you destroyed it. Unfortunately, Texas has done away with a lot of our spoliation instructions and a lot of our spoliation, what is good for us in a spoliation issue. However, we think in this case it's going to be pretty clear to anybody that because they were requested, that even if we don't get the actual jury instruction, everyone's going to know why that record no longer exists.
So you can bring that up into court.
We can bring that fact up.
What happened to the records of Mr. Santos?
Exactly. We just can't ask for the argument from the judge.
We wish you a lot of luck with this case. It's scheduled to go to trial sometime, right?
Well, we're all coming out of COVID, so it's who knows when we'll actually get it into trial.
So good luck with it, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.